Hello, YouTubers. It's me here once again with another one of my top 5 lists in team history. And today we're going to be looking at one of the charter members of that 1963 original NHL draft, one of the original 6, alphabetically, as you can tell. Read down below. We are looking today at the top 5 draft picks in Boston Bruins team history. Be sure to like, favorite, comment, subscribe down below. And the Boston Bruins, what can I say about the Bruins? There's been some really good draft years, some so-so draft years, some alright draft years, and then there's just been some damn right bad draft years, and what the fuck were you thinking? And that's somewhat of the thing about drafting 18-year-olds. Football always brags about how their drafts are so great and all that, but if football actually had to draft 18-year-olds, but they have more busts than some of these teams. But like all sports, some teams get it, some teams don't. And before I get into this, the Boston Bruins, for the first 10 years, really, for what they got out game-wise out of some of their draft picks, didn't understand it. Honorable mentions on this list would be Patrice Bergeron of the 2-3 draft. I bet you there's teams that look back on that draft and say, man, I wish I'd taken that guy in the first round. Craig Janney, who was a pretty big player in his day, like to those late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s teams, was a cog in that wheel. And Craig McTavish, who played with the Bruins, also went on to play with the Edmonton Oilers, Philadelphia Flyers, in those teams. And let's get on to the list. Number 5 in the list is Terry O'Reilly. Now, some might say, why is Terry O'Reilly here? Well, Terry O'Reilly was really the first successful draft pick that spent any time in Boston. Let's just put it that way. When you draft guys like Rick McCleave and Reggie Leach and some of these guys and Andre Savard, and they pretty much didn't do anything with your organization, you got rid of them, let them go to other teams where they had success, like McCleave and Leach went and pretty much were in the Flyers, were big parts of the Flyers organization. Now, I know there's such stuff in there as expansion drafts, but it is what it is. Had a really alright career, 14 years as a career after his playing, went from, I believe, 71 till 85, and then after 85, he became the head coach of the Boston Bruins, which is actually quite a feat, and actually led him to a Stanley Cup, which is actually a really big deal. His stats weren't necessarily the greatest in the world, but as longevity goes in playing there, you know what? It's good that he actually spent 14 years in Boston, which is... And Don Cherry-led teams, I think, were more about beating you up than really playing hockey, but is what it is. Number 4 on the list is Glenn Wesley, the first overall pick in 1987. Glenn Wesley, defenseman. His defense was actually a very good defenseman. Perennial 30 to 60 point guy when he was with the Boston Bruins for about 8 years. Then he went and played, I believe, majority of his career, last years of his career in Hartford/Carolina. Spent 1 year with the Maple Leafs, but was a perennial. He was a key part, though, of that 06 championship team for the Hurricanes. That experience really did help, and he played through the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, which were 3 completely different decades to watch hockey. But anyway, number 3 on my list is, how did I put this? Number 3 on my list is Don Sweeney, 8th overall selection, or 8th round, 166th overall selection. Excuse me for that one. Spent a lot of years in Boston, and even on some of those good Boston teams he was there, and even on some of those bad Boston teams he was there with a lot of players, and especially the number 1 guy on my list. But it's quite his longevity in Boston. I think he only spent like 2 years where he didn't play. He played in Dallas and all that, but he was actually a really good player. Just a shame that he wasn't necessarily the biggest point guy, but he was steady. He was a good defenseman, and that's the thing about Boston. They can draft defensemen. Number 2 on my list is Joe Thornton. Some people might not agree with this one. Joe Thornton, to me, belongs on the greatest list of Boston Bruins draft picks. Is he took the team in around 1997 where they weren't good. Let's just put it that way. And he was drafted first overall. He came in there, had a terrible, terrible rookie season, where it was almost the point where people are thinking, is this guy going to be a bust? And comes in and really solidifies himself as a star. It keeps getting better and better and better and better up until 02, where it was shocking. But the thing about Joe Thornton, they were great regular seasons, but when it came time to the playoffs, maybe not so much. And that's the problem with Joe, is he was this great player, never won the big one for the Bruins. Went and in 05-06 was traded to the San Jose Sharks, where he is now, and same thing, they realized Joe Thornton, good player, just might go down as one of the best players to never win a damn thing in the league. But yeah, that's Joe Thornton. Number 1 on my list, I don't think there's any doubt who number 1 on the list is. To me, he is Boston Bruins. He is one of the greatest Bruins of all time. Is number 77 on defense, Ray Bourque. Out of the 8th overall, out of the 1979 draft, which is a hell of a draft. You had Rod Ramage first overall. You had Mike Gardner in that draft. Nick Foligno was in that draft. Jonas Drondick, I believe, was in that draft as well. Kevin Lowe was in that draft. Messier, Anderson, a lot of great players. Anton Stastny, Michel Goulet. It was a who's who draft. It was probably one of the first really big deal drafts, where that draft was so deep with talent, good talent, not just talent, great talent, Hall of Fame talent. Now, out of all the guys I've talked about, out of this, Ray Bourque is a Hall of Famer, and he is in the Hockey Hall of Fame, one of the greatest defensemen of all time, especially of his era. He was dominant, Ray Bourque. Key part to the 2 cup runs the Bruins made, one in the 80s, one in 1990. Really great defenseman of his era. Like, other than maybe Paul Coffey, could you say there was a better... Maybe that's the thing, is Ray Bourque played in the era where Paul Coffey was the dominant defenseman out of Edmonton, and Lidstrom was the great defenseman out of Detroit. But Ray Bourque stacks up against both of them. In my opinion, one of the greatest Boston Bruins of all time. He had to leave to win his cup, which is a shame, in Colorado. And never forget that. If fans who are younger want to see Ray Bourque, go watch that video of the Colorado Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup and Joe Sakic pretty much handing the cup to Ray Bourque. And then he retired after that. That's big. And Ray Bourque, to me, is one of the greatest, is the greatest Boston Bruins draft pick of all time. He is Mr. Bruin. There is no doubt about it in my mind. Played on some really great Bruins teams. Played on, near the end of his career, some really piss-poor Bruins teams. That's the sad thing. Is that... So he's sort of seen both ends of the spectrum. But anyway, be sure to like, comment, favorite, subscribe. Give me your list of your top 5 Boston Bruins of all draft picks of all time. Be sure to, like I said, like, favorite, comment, subscribe. This is me here once again. Next up on the list is, oh boy, the Buffalo Sabres. We all know who's number 1 on that list. Peace.